welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Dani.
And I'm Giacomo.
And this is our 32nd episode.
You couldn't even be there to pick me up.
All right, well, would you look at that? We're back in like a normal time frame. That's a nice change of pace, wouldn't you say?
What is normal anyway? But yeah, I'm pretty happy about it, actually.
Guys, remember when we started this podcast and we really truly thought we were going to get one out every other week?
You know, we printed out like 1,000 postcards or something, and they say, new episodes, bi-weekly, yeah! And I just keep sending them out with every single order. I'm like, at some point we're going to run out of these postcards so we can like make updated ones saying new episodes.
When we can.
Yeah, or when we have an idea that we want to talk about.
But we thank you guys for sticking with us in spite of that.
Yeah.
That was one of the first pieces of advice we got from the creators of our Henhouse podcast was like, whatever you do, if you create a schedule, stick to it because people will be pissed if you don't. So we decided early on to disappoint you all.
Setting that bar.
So that wouldn't be a problem going forward. But anyway.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I appreciate all the feedback on the last episode, guys, about, not having to heavily edit the podcast, that you guys would rather have slightly less polished episodes in favor of more of them. So I appreciate that feedback, and we're definitely taking it to heart.
Yeah, and I just think in general, I'd rather have fewer episodes with things that are really important to talk about and, than just putting out episodes for the sake of it. You know what I mean?
I agree.
What have you been up to, babe?
The exact same thing, and you know that because we live together.
They don't know that. They don't live with us.
Training, planning, coaching. That's pretty much it. Outside of that, I guess I don't think I've actually mentioned this on the podcast. At the end of December, my sister had a baby, which was the coolest, weirdest thing ever in the entire world. And ever since she's been born, I've been over her house probably at least 3 days a week to spend time with the baby. So that's what I've been doing in my free time. I've been doing a lot of that. And side note, the pregnancy was 100% vegan and the baby is vegan as well and doing fabulously. Anyway, I appreciate all of the feedback that I got. I actually posted this on an Instagram story to see if people would be interested in hearing about this topic or not, because it's actually a debate that Giacomo and I have pretty regularly as of the last 6 or 8 months or so. And if you look back to episode 13, it's an episode about reverse dieting, and I fully believed and agreed with everything that we said in that podcast when we said it, but that podcast is 2 years old now, and I have some pretty different feelings. So Giacomo and I are going to duke it out in talking about reverse dieting. So go ahead, Giacomo. Why don't you give a very short summary of what reverse dieting is to the listeners so that they have an idea of what we're talking about?
But I'm so long-winded. How am I going to do that? Okay, reverse dieting in short is basically when you are done with your contest prep and you've peaked for your show and you've hopped on stage and now it's time to not be dieting anymore. What do you do? So reverse dieting is basically the process in which you stop dieting and transition into your off-season by eating more. And I guess the question is how to do that. When we say reverse dieting, I guess what we're probably referring to is the slow and meticulous adding of food week by week, like to the tune of 25 calories a week or every other week until you get to a caloric baseline. Does that sound about right, Dani?
Mm-hmm. And what is the purpose of this? What is the intended purpose of reverse dieting this slowly?
The intended purpose of reverse dieting that slowly would be to maintain leanness and to gain a minimal amount of body fat post-show, I would say. I would think that that's the number one goal.
And the idea of remaining leaner in the off-season is basically to stay within closer striking range to your stage weight. And I absolutely 100% see why people would be attracted to that idea. And also, I have been attracted to that idea. This idea that you get to stay lean in the off season and eat way more. Hell yes. Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants that. However, in practice, I have seen very, very different things than what reverse dieting touts itself to be. But before I get into that, I would rather hear Giacomo's stance, as he is very pro reverse dieting still, even 2 years later.
Yeah, I would say so. And I guess, anecdotally speaking, it served me well. So I'm saying to myself, well, if it's working for me, whether or not it works for everyone, it's at least worth considering doing again. And that's kind of the...
But wait, what do you mean by it's working for you?
Well, meaning that I'm within close striking distance to my stage weight. I'm only about 10 pounds up. My calories are pretty much where they were before I started my contest prep. I have more muscle. It did what it was intended to do for me.
But here is my question, and we'll get into the other bits later. Well, first of all, no, I'll get into this now. So you were able, on a scale of 1 to 100%, how closely do you feel you were able to stick with your reverse dieting macros right out of the gate?
Well, as far as adhering to my macros for the reverse diet, I didn't have a problem with adherence per se. I mean, there was the fact that right after our show, we got married. And I wasn't about to stick to a stringent reverse diet on our honeymoon. That was by choice. So for that full, I want to say, week that we had together, we pretty much just ate whatever we wanted liberally. There was, it was our honeymoon. Like, who the hell wouldn't want to enjoy their honeymoon, right? And then right after that, before the honeymoon and after the honeymoon, then it was just back to the reverse diet macros that were outlined from the get-go for me. And I'll admit, that was a struggle. Like, yes, I adhered to it. I adhered to it to a T, like 100% to the gram with every ounce of food that went into my body. However, that adherence came at a cost. I definitely felt very, 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 like more than my contest prep hungry for about 6 months. So yeah, I mean, within those 6 months, it wasn't just the hunger that was an issue. It was the fact that my strength wasn't there, my endurance wasn't there, I was still tired. Like, all of the things that I felt during contest prep, I felt those for another 6 months following contest prep. I mean, my hormones were still out of whack, these kinds of things. So the reverse dieting did come at a price.
And I guess my question is, one, is that price worth it? And I say no. And Giacomo says yes.
Exactly.
But let's get into that bit later. Let's just talk about adherence for a minute. So Giacomo, I would say, is one of the 5%, and I think that's being generous, of people who I have found are actually able to adhere to a reverse diet in the traditional sense of adding 25 to 50 calories a week. I would say that I have probably I've coached hundreds of people, but of the competitors, like actual bodybuilding competitors who have reached stage lean levels and come out of a bodybuilding competition and tried to reverse diet, I would say of the probably 50 or 60 competitors that I've coached out of competition season, I can think of 2 people who were able to comply. Now, these are people who were able to measure every gram of food that went into their mouth, sometimes for up to 6 months before their competitions. They were able to do insane amounts of cardio. They were able to hone in on every little detail of their life. And then as soon as the competition was over and it came time to reverse diet, 2 out of 60 people were able to actually stick to it. And the other 58 people, they felt like failures for failing to reverse diet properly, because we had these reverse dieting goals before we went into the competition. And then despite having a proper plan in place, which I feel like many people don't have a proper plan in place before they compete, even though we did, that did not make it any easier for anybody to comply to it. And as somebody who has reverse dieted out of several shows, I will say it is one of the hardest things any competitor will ever have to do, is trying to add food back in without an end goal in mind, a meager 25 to 50 calories at a time. It is almost impossible. And I'm not just saying it because it's hard for me. I'm saying it because it's hard for almost everybody. I think the data says it's some 3% of people that are able to do it. So there's that in and of itself. I've always said the best plan on paper is not a good plan if you can't stick to it. And over the years of practicing this reverse diet on clients and watching it fail again and again and again and again has taught me that it does not matter if on paper this sounds like a good idea, because in practice it is damn near impossible. And I think it's really, really important to differentiate. We are talking to competitors. We are talking to people who have been so lean that their hormones have changed, that their metabolisms have downshifted significantly. These are the people we're talking to. If you've gone through a normal fat loss phase where you chose to, I don't know, drop 10 or 15 pounds for whatever reason you wanted to drop 10 or 15 pounds for, you could probably reverse diet, because you haven't gotten to the point where your entire body is fucked up.
Yeah.
So you can add food back slowly, and you're probably going to be able to do it. But I think the leaner and the hungrier you are at the end of a diet, the more impossible a reverse diet becomes.
I would agree with that. I think there's a certain group of people that can do it without question. And then obviously the ones who have dieted down to stage leanness or to extreme levels, those are the ones where it's like there's no question. Adherence is the issue.
Adherence is the issue. Nothing else. Everything else we can live with. But
right.
Just getting somebody to be able to stick to it, it's really, really, really hard. And I feel like a lot of these coaches out there who, showcase their reverse dieting client successes are not showing you the other 95% of people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And I think that in and of itself is an enormous reason why we should revisit and rethink this idea of a slow reverse out of a contest prep.
Yeah, and I think another thing that is worth mentioning is it really depends on the athlete too. For those who could be potential candidates for a slow reverse diet, is this athlete going to be competing the next year? Are they going to be taking 2 or 3 years off? I mean, this matters. Say that you just competed this year and you're looking to compete again next year. Are you going to spend 6 months worth out of your, 10 to 12 months off season at best? And that's being generous. Are you going to spend half of your off season still feeling like shit and not being able to make real gains?
Well, that's the next thing that I want to get to, is when you are a natural, drug-free athlete, the gains come slow, painfully slow. We've covered this ad nauseum in previous podcasts, but we're talking 3 to 5 pounds a year to a guy, and 2 to 3 pounds a year for a female. And I'm talking about people who have been training for a couple years here. New people, it's a different world. But for people who have already been training for a couple years, which you probably have been if you're competing in a bodybuilding competition, you're looking at anywhere from 2 to 5 pounds, regardless of gender. That's what you can hope. Cross your fingers and hope that all the stars align and you gain a whopping 2 to 5 pounds in a year. Taking any more time to be in that depleted state than you need to I think does more harm than good for most people. Psychologically, you put yourself through hell. Physically, you feel terrible. Like, after a while of being in contest prep, you don't even remember what it's like to feel normal, to feel normal amounts of strength and energy and sex drive. So to put yourself through another 6 months of it is crazy to me. But from a standpoint of gains, you're not going to build. You're going to be in a deficit all the way up until the very tippy top of your reverse diet. And you will not make gains in that time. So you have just robbed yourself of 6 months of muscle building time in your off season. And that, in a game of inches, makes a really big difference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't know that I would say that you can't make any gains until you're at the tippy top of your reverse diet, personally, because I was able to get stronger while reversing, even for the first 6 months. But obviously, if you're comparing someone who just ups their food right away, the second they stop competing, to someone who's painfully and slowly reverse dieting, if you compare the two subjects, the person who's eating more stands to make way more gains, I would say,
Strength
way faster.
and muscle gains.
Yeah, I'd say so.
More quickly.
But, I mean, and obviously they're adding body fat faster as well.
Right. They may be adding body fat faster in the beginning. And also, I should point out, there's no question about that. If you increase food more quickly in the beginning, you are going to gain back body fat. But that's kind of the point, is that you need it to be healthy. You need a certain amount of body fat to be healthy. And that's going to vary, not just from men and women, but it's going to vary from person to person. We all know somebody who walks around perfectly healthy and energetic at a very lean body, with a very lean body. And we all know people who need to have a little bit more body fat on them to feel like a normal, healthy, functioning human. Mm-hmm. That is very individual. But who is to say, even when you're reverse dieting, you are still gaining body fat. Even when you're reverse dieting properly, you are gaining body fat.
Yes.
You are gaining it slowly.
Yes.
But you are gaining it. So
Right.
Who's to say you're not just stretching the exact same fat gain out over a longer period of time than the person who just says and makes peace with the fact that, yeah, I need to put on 10 pounds right now, and just puts on 10 pounds of body fat right away, rather than stretching 10 pounds of body fat over 6 months. Who's going to have more quality workouts in their off season?
Well, during that 6 months of time,
No. In the off season, let's say we have
total.
Let's say we have 2 people that have a 1 year off season.
Well, 1 year, yeah, there's no question.
Okay, let's say we have 2 people who have a 2 year off season. It doesn't matter. The person who's doing it slowly is robbing themselves of 6 months of really good quality workouts. Even if they start to feel better at 4 months, that's still 4 months in a game of inches. 4 months. That's 16 weeks times 5 workouts. We're looking at some 90 workouts that the other person who put on body fat faster is having better quality workouts. 90 times more.
But if they get into their off season, they're taking more than a year off, and they're better conditioned when it comes time for them to cut.
But my point is,
and they have less body fat to cut.
My point is, who is saying they are actually better conditioned? How much body fat would you say you have put on since your last competition?
A couple pounds, 5 pounds maybe.
Of body fat?
Yeah. 10 pounds of body weight, about 5 pounds of body fat, roughly. Ish.
You know that is incredibly unusual, correct? You know that is obscenely unusual. And as a coach, which you are, you need to stop looking at yourself as the standard when you are incredibly genetically gifted. That's a whole nother topic, but definitely something to think about. The average person, even with a successful reverse diet, is gonna put on 10 pounds of body fat. A bigger dude is usually going to put on even more than that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue that.
So who's to say that the reverse dieter has better off-season conditioning? They just got there faster. the person who ate more sooner just got to that same conditioning faster than the person who reverse dieted. Do you understand? Like, let's say someone immediately after a show bumps their calories up by 500, okay? Versus the reverse dieter who takes 3 months to bump their calories up that same 500. Who is to say that that person stays leaner than the other person? Or rather, this person just gains, 5 pounds of body fat right away, whereas the reverse dieter gains 5 pounds of body fat in 3.5 months. Like, but they're still the same, except the person who ate more faster has been logging better quality workouts this whole time, whereas the reverse dieter definitely felt like shit for the first 10 weeks of his reverse diet.
I guess my thoughts, are still of the mindset that when the person who had reverse dieted is much deeper into their off season, that they're going to have a much easier time going into their next show, so they won't have to sacrifice it. Like, sooner or later, you're going to have to pay the price to shave off body fat.
Right, but I'm still saying they're both getting to the same body fat, just at different times.
Well, I guess that's something that we have to...
at a point of starting a contest prep, they're both in the exact same place. Theoretically.
Exactly.
They're both in the exact same place, except the one who ate more faster has now been able to build more muscle because they had more time. Maybe that equates to a whopping pound, but again, we're talking about a game of inches. Gaining an extra pound of muscle over your competitor, it's a big deal in the natural bodybuilding world.
Right, but not if you have to shed that extra pound of muscle just to get lean again, though.
Well, we're talking about contest prep at that point. That's a completely different beast. And, that's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, but there's no denying the fact that someone who starts off a contest prep in a better striking...
But you're still assuming that person is in a better striking range, and I'm saying they're not.
Well, you're assuming that also, theoretically, we don't know.
I'm assuming it from working with people and seeing it firsthand. The people who are able to reverse diet, they still eventually will hit their body fat genetic set point. They're going to hit it eventually. A lot of times if somebody is able to be pretty compliant with a reverse diet, their weight will stabilize, we'll keep adding calories, it's really cool, and then one day their weight just starts going up. Even though we haven't added anything, it just keeps going up. Because your body knows where it wants to be, and your body's gonna get there regardless. We can either get there right away, or we can get there in 3 months slowly. Now, there is a psychological component to watching yourself gain 10 pounds of body fat in a short period of time, and that's tough. That is mentally, some would say, just as mentally tough as reverse dieting and having to be hungry and feel like crap. Just a different kind of psychologically tough.
See, and I don't really care about that. For me, it's just what is the best way to do it?
You are unusual. And that's what we are talking about, is what is the best way to do it. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, but I think for probably the last 4 or 5 years, the vast majority of the bodybuilding community has come to believe that reverse dieting is the closest thing to the best answer that there is. And I am saying that I don't actually think that it is. Now that I've done it myself like 3 or 4 times, and I've done it with clients a bazillion times, and seeing it in action over and over and over again, I really don't think that it is the best thing possible.
There's no denying the fact that for the majority of people coming out of a contest prep, even the experienced, I don't feel that reverse dieting would be like the first thing that I would go to with any client of mine. So I'm not in disagreement with that whatsoever. It's just the how do I say this? I just don't think that it should be something that we completely dismiss. I think that I still feel that there are some potential upsides to it for certain candidates, albeit they're a select few. I still think that it's something to potentially look at for a very, very small percentage of people.
And
Not the people
who
that
are
can,
those candidates?
not the people that can follow it. Not the people that can follow it. Although that's obviously a requirement. So someone that I feel could benefit from it. Obviously the people who are afraid of weight gain, but that's like, that wouldn't be me. But there are some people out there like that. But that's not what I'm trying to say. So you take somebody who has been training for, say, 4, 5, 6 years. They're a seasoned veteran to the stage. They have competed, 3, 4, 5 years in a row. And now they're looking to take more than 2 years off, say 3, 4 years off before they hit the stage again. They have a lot of time after their show to get their body right, to get their mind right, without having to worry about jumping into another show. They're also, their muscles are mature, meaning they're old, so their muscles are, their body's not changing as much as, say, someone who's 20 years old. So 40-year-old, male, 4-year off season, seasoned veteran, is able to adhere to a reverse diet. That would be somebody I would say, hey, should we consider putting this person onto a reverse diet? That would be somebody.
I don't know. I can't say without actually dealing with that particular person, but I would say if they're taking an extended off season, that also means that they have ample time to do some mini cuts along the way that do allow them to shed any excess body fat that they put on in the off season without actually getting into a hormonal state where their entire quality of life goes down.
See, but that's my point, right? Like, I don't have many people to draw from examples here, which is why I'm using myself as an example. Say that I just did a reverse diet and I, gained right away for 6 months, right? Now I'm in a two-year off season and I have to mini cut once or twice during this off season. Like, I'm still paying for it during the off season, whereas opposed to, I got this shit out of the way in the beginning for the first 6 months, and now I'm not mini cutting at all. And right. I'm just steady gaining for the rest of the time in my off season. And I
understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But a mini cut does not put you in the same physiological disadvantages as hanging out at the end of a competition prep for an extra couple of months. That's very, very different. Also, you cannot just keep gaining through your entire off season. You are going to hit a point anyway where anything you gain from there is going to be mostly body fat, and you need to cut back down a little bit to ensure that you're still in a good range to build mostly muscle. But you cannot just endlessly gain muscle without putting on body fat through an off season.
Yeah, maybe.
So I understand what you're saying. You're saying I could pay for it now or I could pay for it later. But I'm saying paying for it at the end of a contest prep is literally just suffering for the sake of suffering.
Yeah, see, and I guess this is where you and I differ in opinion. Because for me, it's like, I had my 6 months of suffering, and now it's been a year and a half where I'm still adding food, and I'm still getting stronger, and I'm still making gains, and I don't have to worry about being potentially sidelined. Granted, no, my physiological symptoms would never be like they were, and my hormones would never be like they were coming out of a contest prep, but like I'm still going to be distracted by a mini cut by eating less and being fueled less. I'm not going to make, to me it's like...
Not so much, because a mini cut is so short. We're talking 6 weeks or less. A mini cut is so short that it's almost like you cut the body fat before your body realizes what's going on, so you're still able to be strong and feel pretty good through almost the entire thing, and then by the time you kind of start to feel like crap, it's done. And you can go right back.
I mean, in theory, yes, but in actuality, mini cuts don't always last only 6 weeks. Sometimes they get stretched out into 10 to 12. So, I mean, yeah, we've sat here and just like dissected this reverse diet philosophy that could potentially work for maybe 2 to 5% of people. So what about the other 95%? Like, what's the alternative? Do we take things from reverse dieting? Do we just scratch the idea entirely? Like, now what?
I think that the best thing that you can do is to bump your calories up much faster. Like, much faster. Like, literally adding 500 calories the day after your show, I think is a good idea. I'm not talking about just not having a plan whatsoever after a contest prep, because that also is a recipe for disaster in the opposite way. I'm not suggesting someone just gains a ton of body fat just because reverse dieting is not the answer, that gaining a ton of body fat is the answer. I'm talking about gaining a very specific amount of body fat. I'll use myself as an example because I think I'm much more in line with like the average competitor than you. So my competition weight usually is around 125. So I know that my body is happiest between 134 and 140. So I would just aim to get to the bottom of that range quickly. So, you know, gaining 9 pounds over the course of a couple weeks, I think is probably a good idea. And I also think that it takes a certain amount of maturity as a competitor to be able to just accept that. And after you've competed for a few seasons, you realize that eventually your off-season weight is going to be what your off-season weight always is. No matter how many times I've reverse dieted or, you know, just tried to stay closer to my competition weight in the off-season, my body wants to be 140 pounds. That's where it wants to live, is at 140. That's where I make the best gains. That's where I feel the best. That's where my strength is the best. That's where my body belongs. So getting closer to that sooner allows me to have better quality workouts. It allows me to continue being an athlete instead of just this starved, depleted, lean bean that can't do anything but looks pretty good. And, you know, for the clients that I've worked with season after season after season, I have some clients that I've worked, this is our 4th season together, and we've tried multiple approaches. And at this point, I know what their off-season weight is going to get to. So get there and stay there. And then gain, from there, you gain very, very slowly in accordance with how much muscle we know a natural athlete can gain in a year. Then that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're shooting for. But the sooner that we can get to that place where you can make gains, where you are eating enough to support that kind of training, the more time you have in your off season. And the off season is everything in natural bodybuilding. It's almost everything. It's mostly everything. Having a quality contest prep is pretty fucking important too. But, you know, making sure that you're in a good place hormonally, mentally, getting your food focused. Oh my God, we didn't even talk about that. How long are you food focused while you're reverse dieting? And when I say food focused, I mean, even when you're not eating, you're thinking about eating. You're thinking about the next thing you're going to be able to eat. You're dreaming about food. You're concocting these perfect, if it fits your macros, meals in your brain. That's normal at the end of a contest prep. But when you reverse diet slowly, you're extending that food focus for how long?
6 months. 6
months of being like that. Like, the psychological component of being food focused for that long, to me, is how it just makes it easier. It's like a
tick?
It's like fertile ground for eating disorders to be born. And many would argue that contest prep is fertile ground for eating disorders to be born as well. And I would say, yep, you're probably right. Why would we go ahead and extend that for another 6 months? No. Get out of that. Pull somebody out of that as fast as you can, because competition prep is the stage lean is a very fragile physical state. And I would want to pull people out of that faster. And it's not an easy sell, by the way. Reverse dieting is a much easier sell.
That's true.
We're going to be able to feed you a lot, and you're going to look damn good. Parentheses, asterisk, you're going to feel like shit for the next half of the year. People don't read that part. They don't read the warnings there. But the other one is like, hey, I know you worked really hard for 6 months. Let's immediately gain some body fat so that you can feel better. Like, I think it takes several seasons of competing to realize that is actually the better choice. Most of us, we work really hard for our stage bodies. We want to hang on to them for as long as we can. And I think that's normal on one hand, but in practice, I just don't think it's the best thing for the vast majority of people. And I think that people who do live stage lean year round, season after season, eventually, most of them, not all of them, but most will face health complications, particularly females, as we just tend to naturally have a higher body fat set point.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part of all is the fact that when it comes to competition, there's sort of like a gold standard for conditioning, and we can all get to that, and some have to work harder to get to that. And the fact remains, like, just because we could all get there, it doesn't mean that we're all going to be able to
Live there.
or live anywhere next near close to there. Like, some people just have higher body fat set points. That's just the way that it goes. But you find people who everyone's just so happy they got there, and then they look at their competition, and they're like, well, they can stay lean in the off season. Why can't I?
Oh, that's me. That's me. I'm the one saying that. I'm the one looking at my competition and being like, how the F can they stay like that all year round?
That's their bodies.
But over the year, well, most of them that I'm talking about,
Some.
it is their bodies. But it's important to remember that, judges don't show up at your house in the off season and do ab checks on you. To be a good competitor, to be a great competitor, you don't have to look like that year round. And generally speaking, you're going to be a better competitor if you have a quality off season. And that's what matters. A lot of times people who stay against their body fat set point and stay unnaturally lean, for them year round, tend to come back the following years looking worse and worse and worse and worse, rather than if they had given their body a chance to thrive in an environment with enough food and body fat.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, you can change your off-season body composition over time by gaining more and more and more muscle, because you're just going to look better that way.
But it takes time. It takes years.
And in the meanwhile, you have to embrace your body weight and body fat set points while you're transitioning and gaining into your body.
Reverse dieting sells this idea that you'll be able to change your body fat set point in a matter of a season, in the matter of a single reverse diet. And for 90% of people, that's not going to happen. You might be able to be a little bit leaner, a little bit tighter, but honestly, who is to say, because you have nothing to compare it to? You have no idea if you would have ended up in the exact same place anyway. So, yeah, that's my new thoughts on reverse dieting, I guess, and how it definitely needs to be rethought. I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think it's for most people.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be my next question to you is, going forward, would you ever prescribe a strict reverse diet to any one of your clients ever again? Would there ever be a time?
Yes. I mean, because I work with my clients and what they want. And a lot of times that's telling them stuff they don't want to hear. But if they want to do it, if they want to try it, then I'm going to support them while telling them why I think there's a better way. And I think that's what I find myself saying to clients a lot, is I think there's a better way. And a lot of times people are hell-bent on reverse dieting, so we start it, and then basically the reverse just gets more and more and more aggressive as they struggle to comply. Rather than adding 50 calories a week, we're adding 150 calories until they're back up to a healthier place. And that's okay. Like, we can still call it a reverse diet even if we're doing it that way. But I think it's important to remember that reverse diet, and those who coined the terms reverse dieting, were literally adding, 10 grams of carbs and 2 grams of fat per week, depending on someone's weight. And that amounts to a big fat strawberry and 2 grams of peanut butter. And just think about that. Think about being starving and feeling like food is right around the corner and being gifted 1 fat strawberry and 2 grams of peanut butter.
Yeah.
Like, it's tough. That's tough to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if anybody has any thoughts or feelings or questions about this, I'm happy to keep talking about it if it's something that people are interested in. I would suggest that you go to YouTube and search for the reverse dieting debate, I believe is what it's called. It came out probably well over a year ago, and it was the first time that I had heard other people voicing the thoughts that I was having about reverse dieting. And I believe everybody in this debate is actually like a PhD. So they're explaining it much better than I am. But it's definitely worth watching. I think it's like an hour long. And
It's a good one. I remember I was psyched when it came out, and it definitely didn't disappoint. It's like, just something that needed to be talked about, basically.
And it finally made me feel like I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
There were people saying the exact same things I was saying. Like, this is impossible. Who cares if it sounds good if nobody can do it?
Right.
So yeah, definitely check that out. But if you have any questions, you can always shoot them at us online. All right, moving on to our product review this week, we are going to be covering HPN Nutrition's Pro Zero Organic Vegan Protein. So it's a new vegan protein to the market, but I think what makes this one unique is that it's coming from a company that normally does not market to vegans. That's not their market at all, usually. And they reached out to us specifically because they wanted to reach the vegan market. And they sent me some samples, and I was just blown away by how good this protein was. And it's kind of been an issue with vegan proteins for a long time, is that our protein flavors are boring. We have vanilla, chocolate,
Sometimes
strawberry, sometimes. Raw Fusion did a pretty good job coming out with the peanut chocolate fudge and banana nut that people really, really love. But outside of that, there's really not much. So when I saw the flavors on these proteins, I was really excited. They have their version of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, they're pretty strongly flavored to the point they call them vanilla frosting, chocolate frosting, strawberry jam. And then there are other fun flavors like blueberry scone, pumpkin spice latte, chai, cinnamon roll with icing. And they're all really, really good. And also the macro profile on them is great. It's 20 grams of protein, 2 grams of carbs, 1 gram of fat. So it's really easy to fit in, even if you do have pretty low macros for whatever reason. So that is really cool. And in addition to having really great macros, it also has added branched chain amino acids, vegan sourced vitamins added to it. Vegan sourced vitamins and minerals added to them as well, which not a lot of protein powders offer vitamins and minerals in them. So that's pretty cool. And it's all organic. So that's, from a big non-vegan company, that's pretty badass actually. Because usually if you can get a plant-based protein from a non-vegan company, it's usually like kind of the bottom of the barrel in terms of protein quality. And also I really like the label, and I know that sounds silly, but the label is the first thing that people see. And I feel like when a big company branches off into the vegan market, yes, obviously as vegans, we're like, woohoo, and we go support it. But also we want, ultimately, non-vegans to try the vegan products and like them. And these are the types of labels that are going to attract your average Joe Schmo meathead to trying them out. So I think that's really, really cool as well. And also, as a side note, HPN donates some 10%, I believe, of all money they receive to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which is really cool. The guy, Sean Torbani, he is the CEO of HPN Nutrition. His brother died when he was quite young and was part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So now he donates proceeds to Make-A-Wish Foundation. So they're a great company for us to support as well. So we just started carrying this protein at our store. Actually, we just launched it like 2 hours ago, and I posted about it on my Instagram, so you can check it out there. And yeah, I think if you're tired of vanilla and chocolate protein powder and you want to try something different, I've been doing the cinnamon roll with icing flavor, and it's really, really good. So yeah, we're also running a special right now where if you buy a tub of the new Pro Zero, we are also sending you a badass vegan cookie with it as well. So if you hear this podcast in the next week, we will send you a badass vegan cookie with an order of a tub of Pro Zero. So if you give it a shot, let us know what you think of it, and feel free to reach out to us on any social media.
Moving on to our Q&A segment for today's podcast. First question comes from Jennifer, and she asks, what about seasons? How do you determine how long your competition season is and how many shows you do, and when and how long your off-season should be?
So this is going to depend on the person very, very much so. But I think that in general, an off season that is less than 6 months is absolutely ridiculous and useless, and you shouldn't even bother with it. I think an off season of a year is a good place to start. And I do think that newer competitors tend to compete every year for several years. And it's mostly just because they're excited and it's still new. But I would say after the first couple of seasons, you start to realize just how taxing it really is on the body. And usually once you have that realization, it's a good idea to take a couple years off at that point. How long your competition season should be? Well, it depends on what you consider your competition season. If you mean the time in which you actually compete, I will say that once upon a time, I did 2 competitions that were 12 weeks apart, and that was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my life. That was so stupid. I would say that if you can keep your competitions in a 6 to 8 week period, I think that's a good idea. And as you become more experienced with competitions, and as like we talked about in this podcast, as your body fat step point starts to get a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower, and you're 10 years into competing and your off-season body is not that far from your in-season body, then you can start to look at longer competition seasons. But in the beginning of competing, where you really have to fight for that competition body, it's very, very hard. It's completely brand new. Your body's not really used to being like that. Oftentimes it's never been like that before. You do not want to spread competing out and staying stage lean over a 3-month period. That is a nightmare. As far as how long competition prep should be, I suggest giving yourself at least a week per pound that you have to lose to step on stage. So that's really how we would gauge how long your actual prep would be.
Yeah, but I feel like people might not necessarily know how much they need to lose, and I think it's good to just kind of give a general idea.
So to give a general idea, I'll give
the bare minimum
general idea for women.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it is okay. So this is very, very generalized, and I hate telling people how much they should or shouldn't weigh, actually. So now that I'm thinking about this, I don't even think I'm going to say it. Every person is going to be different. I've had people under 5 feet tall compete at 115 pounds, and then I've had people who are 5'6" tall compete at 115 pounds. So I'm actually not even going to touch that one with how much they should weigh.
Well, I didn't mean how much they should weigh. I mean how long they should prep for.
Minimum prep.
14?
16 minimum.
Okay.
That's my suggestion. We have a lot of people who come to us and they're like, my show's in 8 weeks, help. And
No.
I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. That's way too short. But I would say a minimum of 16 weeks.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think I don't think it's terrible if you compete more than 1 year in a row at the very beginning just to get the experience in, because like I don't care how many shows you get in your first year, like you're gonna have a different attitude the next time around when you compete. So to kind of do like 2 years back to back, even at the expense of having a shorter off season, it's okay, especially if you're young, because you can make better gains when you're younger. And then you can sort of like, you know, really see where you stand out there, take some extra time off.
Well, yeah, like after a couple years, you need to take a few years off.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you do all the right things, you're going to come back a significantly better competitor after a longer off season.
Absolutely. So experience is something to consider when competing more than 1 year in a row. And then after that, it comes strictly to how much better of a package you could bring. As
to how many shows you should do in a season, that really depends on your budget more than anything else, because competing is expensive. I personally like to have 2 weeks in between shows. 2 shows back-to-back weekends I think is tough. I've done it with clients, but it is a little bit tough because you're coming off the first peak week and then going into the next peak week. So I think 2 weeks apart is good. And then if you're doing 6 to 8 weeks, so 3 to 4 shows, I would say.
Yeah, and I think being mentally prepared, like you have to check yourself too. Are you really ready to do more than one show? Some people just get to that show and it's like they don't want to do any more. I mean, it took me maybe like 4 or 5 different competition seasons before I was comfortable with doing more than one show in a season, for example.
Not me. I did 2 in my first season.
Yeah. Go you.
And they were 12 weeks apart and it fucking sucked.
Yep.
All right, what's the next? Question from Rosemary. How do you incorporate a free meal, a cheat meal, into IIFYM? Which meal to replace or which macros if you're not eating the same thing daily?
Well, first off, and this, I'm happy I'm getting this question because I even thought about doing a whole podcast on it. I hate the word cheat meal. It's probably one of my biggest pet peeves in the nutrition world. I cannot stand the word cheat meal. The word in and of itself has a negative connotation to it, and it almost implies that you're
doing something wrong.
Yeah, I can't stand that. Like I don't. Cheat meal is not. Having a meal that you don't track doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. Doesn't mean that you're doing damage. Like that's not helpful at all for the mindset. Free meal is the way that I like to word it. And so you mentioned like replacing macros for a free meal. Well, I guess that's kind of not really the point of a free meal. A free meal is sort of something that you should be doing more intuitively.
But I understand her question.
Yeah,
she's asking if you have a free meal, what should your macros for the rest of the day be?
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Oh, okay. So I guess I misunderstood. So usually when we program a free meal, we already have all the meals mapped out for the day, and generally that means they're going to have a sizable pre and post workout meal and maybe a snack or 2 during the day, and then the rest of the macros, I would say maybe like 30% of your intake for the day. Like I would take that out of your macros and replace it with a free meal.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. 30%.
Roughly.
Not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. The other thing you can do is if you're replacing your dinner, go back through the week, see how much you normally eat for dinner, and then take those macros out. If you're following IIFYM and flexible dieting and you're doing it well, your meals are probably kind of similar every day. Flexible dieting does not mean necessarily just eat whatever you want every single day on a whim. It just gives you the freedom to change things up as you see fit. But most of us that follow flexible dieting eat similarly every day. So like my dinner is the same shit every night. So I can look back and say, oh, my dinner is 600 calories every night. These are the macros. It's, 80 carb, 20 fat, whatever. And pull that from my macros for the day. Mm-hmm. And then have my free meal then.
Yeah.
So that's how I would do it.
Let's take another question. Nadej, and I hope I'm saying your name right. Do vegan bodybuilders carb load the same way a non-vegan would? And she's referring to peak week.
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
it's again, you can't say this for everybody because some people don't even carb load. Some people don't have to. Some people do have to. But in general, if somebody had to carb load to make their muscles fill out, look nice and full and tight on stage, they would have to do that whether they were vegan or not. Some of my clients, their carbs can get quite low in the earliest part of peak week as we deplete glycogen and stuff like that, and then, you know, carb up mid to late week. And, you know, I can't say that it's the same numbers as other people because every client is different. Some people are carbing up on 150 grams of carbs. Some people are carbing up on 600 grams of carbs. So it just depends on the person. But I don't think that particular like peak week protocol changes whether someone is vegan or not. And every coach is going to do it differently. But I would say that it's the same.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's take Christian's question. Is keto veganism a thing?
It is a thing, actually. Yeah, it can be done. It's hard. It's stupid. It's pointless.
Didn't you do it for a little bit?
Not really. But we did me and my coach, we did experiment with very low carbs on dieting. And I would say my protein was higher than a classic keto. So what people think keto is that it's no carbs. And it is pretty much no carbs. But it's also very high in fat. We're talking 80% of your macros from fat. And then a small percentage of them from protein. So protein's a little lower. Fat is super high. Carbs are almost non-existent. Yes, it can be done with a combination of, you know, tofu basically as the main protein source because seitan, too many carbs. Tempeh, too many carbs. Beans, what are beans? You can definitely not eat beans. You can't eat broccoli, kale, like all of that has too many carbs for keto. So to be in true ketosis, you need to be like under 30 grams of carbs per day. It is almost impossible to do that as a vegan, almost. And the ways that you can do it as a vegan, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Outside of just experimenting with oneself, I don't think it's a great idea. A step up from vegan keto would be a cyclical ketogenic diet, which means you are eating traditional keto anywhere from like 3 to 5 days a week, and then the other days of the week you're refeeding, eating a relatively high number of carbohydrates to refuel glycogen, boost leptin, all that jazz, and then you drop back down into keto the following days. Overall, I just think it's more hassle than it's worth. Can it be done? Yes.
Did you ever feel better, like at all? Did you ever get used to it while you were doing it?
Yeah, I did. After about 3 weeks or so, I did start to get used to, and my carbs were not keto low. They were 65, which is still high, very high for keto. But for me, that was like, it might as well have been zero. It might as well have been zero. It was nuts to try and eat just 65 grams of carbs a day. Like I couldn't eat any vegetables outside of iceberg lettuce, if you recall.
Yeah.
No vegetables outside of iceberg lettuce. Think about that, because they all had too many carbs. I did have high carb days also, but those low days, shit, the first 2 weeks I felt like I was losing my brain. Like I couldn't think, I couldn't remember stuff. And then after 2 weeks, I started to feel fine because your body is a very adaptable machine. And even though traditionally your brain runs on carbohydrates, your brain can also turn both fat and protein into glucose in your body. Post-recording edit, I said your brain can turn fat and protein into glucose, and I meant your body can turn fat and protein into glucose. All right, continue. So if you're feeding it fat and protein, it's going to turn fat and protein into glucose, and it's going to be ultimately very, very similar. And it didn't work. It was not for me. There was no benefit to it whatsoever in terms of fat loss, but at least it's, you know, you got to look at your body as an experiment. And that was an experiment that we tried, and we checked it off the list.
Carbs all the way.
Carbs. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Muscles by Brussels Radio. Feel free to reach out to us with questions, comments, concerns on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at VeganProteins and at Muscles by Brussels. In the meantime, my name is Dani,
And I'm Giacomo.
and we will talk to you soon.
Stand in the